okay, this thing doesn't really exist kind of thing. And this is a little bit of a story about my own story, but also I really want to point out a lot of the pieces of information here have been taken from a whole host of folks that I've talked to about really what are things that they wish they had known about. What would they tell themselves, their like selves from 15, 20 years ago, that would have made their lives easier had they known about this before they entered the greater academic job market or academia in general. So that was really the basis of some of these ideas. Before I move on, I do want to go ahead and give credit to Sean Jenkins from Happy Cat Design. I had thought about this idea of the academic unicorn, and I said, hey, I know you're a graphic designer. Do you have any thoughts on what an academic unicorn would look like? And this is what he came up with. And what's great about it is that, you know, it's this very knowledgeable unicorn, but instead of being sort of meek and, you know, uncertain and whatever, is, you know, it's powerful, you know, creature that is, you know, able to, you know, navigate their way through this complex territory. So thank you to Sean, and I hope that that gives you a little bit of inspiration navigating these tumultuous waters. So a little bit about my journey, and some of these things you know, and some of them you don't know. So let's go ahead and get right into it. I did get my undergraduate degree at Cornell University, and I got my PhD at Penn, both in chemistry. So certainly I had a lot of experience at Art One institutions. While I was in graduate school, I had communicated to my PhD advisor, who was Larry Snedden, who he asked me what it is that I wanted to do. And I said, you know, I really like teaching. I like education. I like to communicate about science. And he said, great, you should go teach, because you're never going to get a job unless you get some experience. And I said, and he said, yeah, go moonlight, have fun. And I thought, that's crazy. But it was really, really great advice. So maybe we'll start there, from advice I got from my old PhD advisor. If you want to do teaching, try to find opportunities to teach. So a little interesting story about this particular job is that this is something that I got as a result of a cold resume. By that, I mean, I sent a cover letter and a resume to a place that was not actually advertising any openings at all whatsoever. And I said, hi, I'm here. These are my skill sets. And I know you're not advertising positions, but if you happen to find something, let me know. And I want to say I sent this on a Wednesday. By Monday, I got a phone call that said, can you start Monday? Which was both horrifying and awesome at the same time. And he said, okay, well, you know, so little hitch, it's in forensic science, but it's just like Gen Chem. Just so you know, it is nothing like Gen Chem at all whatsoever. However, in my naivete, I said, sure, that sounds great. And thus began my academic career in teaching, where I basically had to teach myself all of forensic science too, no less, because it was the spring semester. So good times, good times. Now, apparently I didn't screw up too bad, because they did get asked back to come back and adjunct several times after that. And actually, I'm still good friends with the person who hired me there. So apparently it worked out pretty well. Now, after that, I obviously wanted to get something a little bit more full-time once I got my PhD. So I got a one-year sabbatical replacement at Bryn Mawr College. And those of you who don't know what Bryn Mawr College is, it is right outside of Philadelphia. It is an all-women's institution, and it is a relatively small space. And there's a lot of really interesting dynamics and things that happen in an all-women's institution. After that, I moved into a role as a program coordinator for the Robert H. Noyce Scholarship. This scholarship provides funding for undergraduates in STEM to pursue a career in teaching. So it allows them to get teaching certification as they progress through their STEM curriculum. And this is in response to a real shortage of STEM teachers in the nation that are trained in both education and STEM. Following that, I did some adjunct work at the Community College of Philadelphia. So again, moving into a very different space. Hot on the heels of that, I was working as a program director for a nonprofit helping minorities and women have enrichment in STEM. So these are high achieving students that fall into the categories of what we would call URMs, or underrepresented minorities in STEM. And I was able to create a lot of curriculum and programming around enrichment activities for that particular group. I was a high school teacher for a year, believe it or not. So I spent some time teaching honors chemistry and AP chemistry, as well as my BFF forensic science, which I can't really quite seem to shake. Hopefully, hopefully that might be the end of it, but maybe not. forensic science was never anything I learned much about other than through teaching it. And so I always felt a little bit like I was on shaky ground there. But in any case, I ended up working there for a year, and unfortunately, owing to some health challenges, I ended up having to back out of that position, and then ended up working 9 years as an assistant teaching professor at Villanova University, where in addition to general chemistry and inorganic chemistry and some polymers classes, some graduate level classes and things like that, I also taught forensic science. So one fun fact, once you've established yourself in one role, there is a good chance you may get stuck in it for a little while unless you sort of purposely move yourself out of that. And of course, the past year or so I've spent here as the managing director of the CSSM. And obviously most people on this call know this, but not everybody maybe, which is that we did not get our funding renewed. And so here I am back trying to figure out what I'm doing with the next step of my life, which is part of what has created the need in my mind for this particular talk, because I've discovered that I've learned a lot of things, not only in the past 10, 15 years, but really in the past year of my time being here, that I really wish my younger self had known. So here is hopefully going to help you save a little bit of trouble thinking about those things. So those are my professional side. That's the professional side, but there's some personal items that have to round out the picture, because those things both come into play. You can't just have the professional without the personal, or the personal without the professional. So I was one of those weird psycho people who I was engaged through my senior year of college, got married the summer right after I graduated with my bachelor's degree. So I look like a small child in this picture, but that's all right. I will have celebrated my 18th wedding anniversary in about a month, so clearly it worked out okay. Other things, I had 3 kids, so yay, that's exciting. I was also considered, I'm sure, quite crazy, because I had my first child in my 3rd year of graduate school, and I was 24 years old at the time. And it was the kind of thing where I thought, well, why not? I had a partner, I had some sort of stable income for a little while. It wasn't, a ton on a graduate stipend, but my husband had a job, and I thought, why not? And he's now 15. Then I had a daughter in the August right after my Bryn Mawr College sabbatical replacement. So that was by definition a 1-year position. It was bounded by time. And so what you might appreciate is the challenges of trying to interview while very heavily pregnant. It turns out that that is a thing that everybody cares about, even though they claim they don't. And it made it very difficult to find any kind of positions after that. And she is now 11. And then my youngest son was birthed during my time at Villanova, and he is now 7 years old. And so I share that because those are clearly 3 different times of your life, being in graduate school, being in this kind of in-between temporally bound position versus a time at Villanova where I spent 9 years. And that's going to come into play in a conversation in just a little bit in my talk. Now, those are all positive things, which is why they are in green, but negative things happen too. Health challenges started really happening when my daughter was 2 months old. I ended up having kidney stones. I've had my gallbladder out. I have a thyroid condition. It's a whole good thing. And I had a really substantial accident about 9 years ago that created a permanent disability in my left arm. And so I have really pretty severe nerve pain and nerve damage in my left arm, which makes a lot of really simple things very difficult for me, including things like typing. So that's fun. It's been an interesting journey. And in addition to other negative personal things, there have been quite a bit of losses. So 2 months into my time at Villanova, literally, it was September. I just started there, and I had lost my very, very best friend in the entire world. That's there she is right there. That's Melissa. She died in a car accident. It was absolutely awful. And this happened to be in the span of losing 7 people in 5 months. So it was completely soul crushing, while still trying to, start a new job and really try to make a name for myself in this new position. Additionally, I lost my father in 2016, and my father-in-law passed away literally days before I started my position here as the managing director. And so I was juggling between funeral arrangements and also trying to establish myself and also finishing things up at Villanova. So a lot of craziness and a lot of transition in all this. So I share this because it's going to come into play in a little bit as we start discussing some of these pieces of advice that I've learned. And I share this to provide a little bit of background, because obviously everybody has their own story and everyone has their own narrative. And what I'm sharing is based off of my experiences, which may be very different from your own. So that's just a disclaimer it doesn't necessarily mean that this is the right, avenue for you. So how do we navigate this greater academic job market, given all of these variables, those professional variables, the personal variables? So we're going to break this down into needs, wants, and deal breakers, juggling the professional and the personal, inside secrets that change the game, and keeping your options open. So we're going to kind of think about it in those categories. In terms of needs, wants, and deal breakers, I really encourage you, if you are thinking about a position, to actually make a list of these kinds of things. So perhaps in an early career list, it's going to look like, oh, I want a livable salary. I would like some health insurance. Sure. I want to be safe in my work environment. And, maybe I really, really value upward mobility because I'm early in my career and I want to make sure I have somewhere to go. And then in terms of wants, well, maybe I want really great health insurance. That would be awesome. But maybe just basic health insurance is okay. And maybe I'd love to have a larger salary so that I can have savings and things like that. But maybe it isn't as necessary early on. And maybe you just, I'm going to put in my time and then I'll get that really high paying job later. Maybe that's the thought. Maybe you want to be in some place geographically, but you could be flexible about those things. And so again, these are some things that might fall under the wants category. And the deal breakers are often sort of the opposites of the needs, but there are also sometimes extra things that come about as you start working in a place and you realize, oh, I hadn't really considered this as a variable. Turns out this is also a deal breaker. So those are just some things to consider. Now, you'll notice that my needs column is in blue. You'll notice that my wants column is in green and my deal breakers column is in purple. And the reason that I put it there is to give you that hint, because as you look at a sample mid-career list, things may change around quite a bit. So, okay, livable salary is still a need, sure, but maybe you've had a situation like myself. Maybe you had a really, life-changing accident, or you've had really awful health experience. And all of a sudden, great health insurance is absolutely necessary for you. And it becomes a need and not a want. It's not enough to just be rudimentary. And maybe you had a really bad experience in a previous job and it wasn't enough to be safe. You needed it to be welcoming. And so now that becomes a need. Hey, you're getting older. I want to prioritize my retirement benefits. And this wasn't even on the list before because maybe I didn't have a family then. Maybe now I care a lot about making sure that there is good maternity leave or there is good, childcare credits or things like that. Again, if you look at your wants, those were green, right? But now upward mobility maybe is a want, but maybe isn't as important as some of these other things. And again, hey, it'd be great if I had tuition remission so I could, make sure my kids could go to college. That would be great. And again, notice before the geography was a want, now maybe it's a deal breaker. And I will say, for myself, that is a situation. My entire support system is in the Philadelphia area. And so for me, it's a deal breaker if I have to leave Philadelphia because I can't support my family without being, in a space where I have that kind of support system. So that changes as you have different things happen in the course of your life. So key takeaways from this aspect is know what you want, know what you need, and know it's a deal breaker for you. And that's going to be different for everybody. And it's really helpful sometimes to write that out and compare that against job postings and compare that against search terms you may be looking for. And be prepared to be flexible because as your life changes, you're going to find that your expectations and your needs are going to change in your professional life as well. So you've got this unicorn friend, and this unicorn, poor thing, is just looking really very sad. The tongue sticking out, really struggling to hold those balls in the air. And it's just trying to juggle this professional and this personal aspect. And how do we even do that? So let's go ahead and think about that. Here are some key observations that I've made from experiences in juggling the personal and professional. Now, again, others may disagree with me. I'm just sharing from my perspective. The times that you are working the hardest and have the least amount of free time are exactly the times that you need to prioritize yourself. And that sounds like the opposite advice of what I should be telling you. I should say, you have these hard deadlines, you got to work really hard, and then you can rest all you want. That, in my experience, has led me to burnout very quickly. So what I would recommend is that those times when you're saying, oh my gosh, I don't have any hours in the day, I'm so frazzled, I'm so exhausted, you instead take a long weekend, schedule a massage, visit a family or a member or a friend, take your dog out for a walk to the park, visit a museum, whatever. Do something to take your mind off of the thing that is sucking up all of your resources. And the reason that I suggest this is because If you're feverishly working on this one thing, what happens is that you just can't get out of it, and it's mentally exhausting. It makes it very difficult to function, and makes it very difficult to focus. And so this is just sort of life advice that I found to be very, very helpful. Find activities that allow your mind to turn off and do them regularly. In my case, those are things like gardening. Those of you who are, in Philly, you've seen me do some baking and had perhaps reaped the benefits of that. I like to do like handicrafts and things like that. I know that that sounds all very crazy, but these are things, that I wish that someone had told me a long, long time ago would be really important. At first, I thought it's just a hobby. And now I'm coming to realize that it's actually really important to keep those things in balance. So here is a hot take, which is there is no such thing as a good time for personal transitions. So things like marriage, you're talking about a wedding. I said, okay, I got married right out of college. And you might say, oh, that's a crazy time. Oh my gosh, you're so young, blah, blah, blah. I've heard it all, I promise. Right? I was 22 when I got married. And so I've heard all of the different things. And the real answer is the right time is when you and your partner are ready to move on. And that really should be really the only key aspect to that. And sometimes I hear, oh, well, I'm going to wait until after I get this point in my career, or I'm going to wait until this. And I'll put the caveat out here that, of course, you need to make sure you have the resources to pay for some of these things, right? Weddings are not generally free. And many of these other things come with, a requirement of having certain resources. However, I often hear like, well, I want to be secure. I want to make sure that I have all of my ducks in a row and everything is well planned. And what I'm here to try to maybe point out is that that time will not happen. Something always gets in the way to make it not a perfect time. And these things absolutely will uproot your life. So for example, getting a pet, you might think, oh, that's not a big deal. That could be, I'll wait until a certain time. And of course, you need to have the resources to take care of the pet. However, no matter when you get it, it will completely mess up your schedule in a really delightful, wonderful, positive way. However, it's not, there's not really a great time for those kinds of transitions. Starting a family, obviously that's a big one. That's probably the one I've heard the most, which is, oh, I'll wait until blah. Identify random professional, standpoint or marker that I want to achieve before I start a family. And I will say, I had the misfortune of having a lot of health challenges appear fairly early in my life. And I'm glad that I was able to have my family when I was, because I'm not sure that that would be a possibility later in my life. That doesn't mean that that's true for everybody. I'm just saying when it's the right time for you personally is when you should take care of, making those transitions happen organically rather than holding off until some sort of professional, marker has been met. Moving is always going to uproot you. And I realize that that's an obvious statement, but it's always going to be difficult. It's always going to take time. It's always going to mean, changing around everything about that. And so there's not always really a great time to do those things. They're always going to be intrusive. Health concerns. It's a picture of my dog after he recently had ligament surgery. That is highly inconvenient, but guess what? It would also have been inconvenient any other time. And also things like deaths or taking care of elderly or ill family members or friends. They come when they come, and you just have to take them when they come. And it's really important to focus on what personally makes you happy, because that's ultimately what we need as people. That is the part that makes you happy, is the things that rely on your relationships with your family and your friends. That doesn't mean that your professional life isn't important. It absolutely is. However, I guess I'm trying to suggest that, keeping that professional life will always be there, in the sense that you can always go back to it. You can always, recreate yourself in that space. But some of these things are just going to happen when they happen. And so trying to plan around them is not always so simple. Communicate your needs early to avoid surprises. Now, I'm going to put a caveat on this particular slide, which is that this is the kind of thing that requires a little bit of courage. And sometimes that's really difficult to have if you are up against a wall and you need to pay bills next month. I've been in that position too. So I'm going to share these things as this is what is ideal. And I understand that sometimes these are things that are not possible because you're up against a wall and you have to make different decisions. So I would call these best practices, but that also isn't really true because it just depends on what your situation is. Look for indications in job postings of an environment compatible with your needs. And that may sound obvious. However, if it says, for example, it requires 50% travel, and you know that you have an elderly family member that you have to help take care of, that's probably not going to be compatible with your life. Other things, be upfront about your preferences during the interview process. And this is something that I've learned to do over the course of time, saying these are the things that I really like to do. This is what I really enjoy. And when you do that, you're communicating to your potential employer that those are the things that excite you. Those are the things that are going to get you excited and moving and doing really good work. And so it's a key to them to know how to be able to engage with you. You can use your written documents, your resume and your CV, to highlight those things you've most enjoyed and the things that you're most proud of. So again, you don't have to write everything down. And you can spend a little more time talking about the things that you would like to highlight and say, ooh, look at that, versus, something that maybe you aren't as confident in, or something that you don't enjoy as much. Ask questions in your interview process that would give you a sense of the work environment. We actually talked a little bit about this yesterday in our conversation with Joe Martino, but this idea of, ask questions like big picture questions or hypothetical questions, so you can get a sense of some of the things that are intangible that you can't read in a job posting. And it can be tricky to sort of navigate that space, but it does certainly help to avoid surprises after a contract has been signed. And this one's particularly challenging to do because once you're in a position, you're doing perhaps new in that position, and you want to make a good impression. But I would say try not to be too shy about sticking to what was discussed in terms of your preferences and work-life balance. So if in your interview process or in your negotiation process, you said, I want to have such and such a thing, and they agreed to that, it is a good idea to say, okay, you know what, this is something that I really need. And, I would really appreciate if we could, honor that thing that we discussed. Now, again, this is also situation based, right? You don't want to have a situation where you're worried about losing your job, or, perhaps there's a project that requires you to drift away from that for a little bit, but then it's not a bad idea to say, okay, we'll do this for now, but I'm going to need to take maybe a little bit of time next week to adjust for this extra effort that this is requiring. And it's giving everybody maybe clearer signals about what it is that you need to do your best work. And we want to avoid surprises. We want happy surprises, but not bad surprises. So key takeaways out of this portion: your personal well-being is what will largely dictate how happy you are. And I say this as somebody who is very ambitious professionally as well. And I'm not saying that professionally, my happiness is not tied to my professional life. It very much is to some degree. However, in terms of the things that really mean things, to my core, it's important that you prioritize your personal well-being, your mental health, your physical health. The things that allow you to do your best work and your best enjoyment of life have to be your priorities, and everything else will fall into place. Communicating early and not being shy about making sure your employer knows what you need to do your best work. And you know yourself better than anybody. So being clear about, hey, this is how I work best. And, that is really, really helpful information to a potential employer. So inside secrets that change the game. So these are things that are, tips that have really come out of not only my experiences, but experiences of other people that I've shared this conversation with in the past. So find a way to go to conferences. And this is really, really important for the academic job market, as well as just generally professionally. In-person conferences are going to give you a bigger bang for your buck, so to speak, than virtual conferences. So this picture here is from the ACS Green Chemistry and Engineering Conference. When I got there at the beginning of this conference, I knew zero of these people. I had no idea who they were. And by the end of spending 3 days sitting in symposia with them and having countless discussions about various talks, we became very friendly with one another. We had meals together, we chatted. By the end, we were friends. And it was very clear that we were going to be part of each other's networks for a long time. These are from the recent RARC conference, right? So the idea here is, all right, go ahead and do the good thing, get recognized, because now folks that get recognized for, doing really well on a poster, oh, great. Now there's an opportunity for someone else to say, hey, I noticed you won this award. Congratulations. Tell me more about what you do. And now you have another opportunity to network with that person. Also at in-person conferences, you always have the need to eat. And so that is an opportunity to sit down with random people and have conversations, which can really help prompt those relationships. That can really help you later on in that job market, but also in your projects, if you're doing research projects or other projects. This is one that is very rarely talked about, but one that I've come to appreciate as being really, really important. Advocate for your own public-facing image. Hold on, this bar is coming up, and I just wanted to, there we go. Advocate for your own public-facing image. And what I mean by that is that you need to find a way to create your own persona publicly. So it is absolutely okay to ask for an invitation to give a talk. And that sounds crazy. You're like, well, I sound like I'm begging, or, oh, I don't want them to think blah, blah, blah. Who cares? Who cares what they think? What you say is you say, hey, this opportunity, or I see there's this conference, or I see there's this symposium or whatever. And you say, I have such and such a topic that I feel like I could talk about. Could I be invited to speak at this? The worst that they will say is no. And I recognize this requires some courage. It requires a bit of humility and the ability to handle it if they say no. However, I will say 9 times out of 10, they will say yes, because when there are these conferences or symposia or opportunities, most of the time, those people are looking for people to speak. And so you're actually helping them out by volunteering something to give to their program. So for example, this is a talk I did for the Mutter Museum earlier this year. And I was approached and said, hey, do you know anyone who can talk about X? I said, actually, I could talk about X. And they said, oh, well, that's great. Fantastic. Well, come to see it. I don't know, this is kind of an old screen grab, but this thing is out over 1,000 views on YouTube, which I never would have imagined. And I totally didn't expect, but it was a really nice boon for my, for having that forward-facing image. Make yourself known to the media communications people at your institution. So every university, most companies have a communications group that manages what the company puts out to the world. Know who those people are. Send an email and say, hi, my name is blah, blah, blah. Here is what I do. I would love to meet with you for coffee or over Zoom or whatever, and tell you a little bit more about what I do, so that if you see any stories that might be relevant to me, that you can reach out to me. Now, it's because of this, you can see this is obviously from my previous role. It says experts on the news. I had gotten to know these people from the media communications department very well. And they highlighted my outreach. They were looking for stories and they said, hey, do you have anything for us? I said, as a matter of fact, I do. And this was, of course, at the beginning of the pandemic. And I was doing these online outreach programs before really anybody else was doing them. I get to know who's in charge of social media and website posts more locally too. So notice this is the Department of Chemistry at Villanova University, right? So there are a lot of these subgroups are going to have opportunities and people who are maybe more locally responsible for a Twitter feed or a Facebook feed or some kind of Instagram or whatever, right? Get to know who those people are, because again, they're often charged with, I want you to find content, and it's hard to find content. So if you come to them and say, hey, guess what? I think I have content you might be interested in, you are doing them a favor. And you should attend and organize community-facing events, because again, that gives you a bit more exposure online. Now, why is that important? Because any prospective employer that you have is going to Google you. This is a thing. This is a thing that is fairly well known. They're going to Google you. And when they Google you, you don't want them to come up empty. You want that first Google page to basically be a glorified resume of all the great stuff you've done. You want to be able to cater and sort of craft that public-facing image that they're going to get when you Google them. And you want to make it real easy for them to be like, oh yeah, nah, that person's great, because, oh, look, they've got this talk and they've got this, and look at this thing that they've done. And they're not afraid to reach out to the community, and they're not afraid to make these people look good, right? These universities, these organizations look good when you do something good in their name, right? And so it's really a benefit to everybody. It helps you as a prospective employee, and it helps the organization in showing their community forward facing, I guess, face, right? So learn what you can about university structure and culture. And there's a lot on here, but I promise I'm going to break it down. So there are different kinds of colleges and universities, and most people do not know this. Even some people, students who go to some of these places. So you may have heard R1, those are very high research institutions. That means they place a strong favor on research over teaching. That does not mean that teaching is not important. It means that the people who are the most, I guess, famous are going to be the ones who are famous for their research. And generally, a fair amount of that teaching is offloaded to lecturers and instructors, TAs, things like that. And the vast majority of the CSSM institutions are R1 type institutions, high research, very high research. R2 is sort of the step down from that. R3 isn't really a designation anymore. They've switched that over to doctoral or professional. And again, it's, as the further over to the right you go, the more the focus is on teaching and the undergraduate experience. And the further to the left you go, the emphasis is more on research and the postgraduate experience. PUI stands for primarily undergraduate institution. And actually Reed College, one of our colleges that we have in our CSSM partnership, is a PUI. And so it means that the allocation of resources is just targeted more towards certain things over other things. If you are potentially looking to get into the academic job market, that is really helpful knowledge, because maybe you care more about teaching, or maybe you care more about research. Doing research at a PUI is a very different experience than doing research at an R1. The expectations are different and the resources are different. So it's important that you go in with eyes open. If you're looking for a position in a 2-year versus a 4-year college, again, 4-year colleges often have broader programs. Again, some of them may belong to one of these groups. 2-year colleges are things like community colleges and sometimes other small colleges that generally provide an associate's degree, and the focus will be basically 100% teaching. So if that's what you're looking for, it's a great place, and many of them are unionized and pay quite well. Sometimes even better than the 4-year colleges. So it's just keep in mind that pay doesn't necessarily go with any of these categories independently. Some of that has to do with other factors. Private versus public institutions. So private institutions are really span a huge range. Some of them, like Bryn Mawr College, has like a niche, right? They're all women's university or college, right? There's an all women's college that comes with certain, challenges, and it comes with opportunities. And so if you're comfortable in that demographic, that does not mean that you have to be a woman to be a worker or a staff member or a professor at Bryn Mawr College. Many are, but not all are. And in fact, they can't discriminate that way. That is literally illegal to do. But what you do need to know is that you are going to be handling a demographic that isn't necessarily representative of the larger demographic because, for example, it's all women. Some private institutions are religious in nature. They don't generally carry a requirement to be of that faith, but you should know what that faith is and whether that aligns with your core values. And if it does, great. If it doesn't, maybe it's not the place for you. So finding that magical fit, right, is going to be really important in understanding what the institution's main missions are. Public institutions are going to be largely state funded. Those also, just as an FYI, the demographics here can be somewhat different too, based on socioeconomics. Public institutions are often subsidized by the state, and so their tuitions tend to be a bit lower. So you might find a little bit more socioeconomic diversity in a public institution. That's not always true, but it's just kind of a rule of thumb. Liberal arts, and I write vocational curriculum. I hesitated a lot on this word and I couldn't find the right word, but basically what I mean is things that are subject specific. So something like Caltech or MIT, those are obviously very hardcore engineering, sciencey type schools, versus liberal arts are things that are going to encourage you to explore things like theater and philosophy and things like that. And so you're going to get a different kind of student that's going to come to one of these places. So if you're interested in applying as a faculty or staff member to one of these places, keep that in mind. You're going to get a different demographic. Positions can be tenure track or non-tenure track. Tenure track positions provide you long-term stability, but they're also A, very difficult to get, and B, almost always come with the research component. Non-tenure track positions are going to be largely teaching based, not always, but there's often a larger reliance on teaching that goes with that, and they don't have that same long-term stability, but there are a whole lot more of them. The majority of academic positions are going to be non-tenure track positions. The number of academic jobs is much larger than the number of professor positions. So if you're just thinking academic means professor, That is not true. There are facility-specific staff, so maybe an NMR or an HTE or a mass spec specialist, program managers or coordinators, science communication specialists, research specialists. By this I mean maybe the PI is off doing something and they need somebody to run their lab while they're away. That's something that you can do, or maybe you're running a clinical lab or something like that, like one of these types of things. Science librarians, that also requires a little bit of extra schooling, but certainly is a position that is necessary in some of these academic positions, and grant-based positions, which has to do with not only writing grants, but also potentially being funded by grants. Salary negotiations are super tricky. So know the range for your position in your geographical region. So if you are, say, I'm in Philly, right around here, we're have a relatively high cost of living, but not nearly as high as, say, the Bay Area in California, or say New York City, right? Like those are going to have really, really, really high cost of living, as in contrast to a place like, say, Alabama, which generally has a much lower cost of living. So the same position may have very different salaries depending on the geography where it's located. When you're negotiating, make sure that you can explain why you might deserve higher pay or more benefits. What is it that you're bringing to the table that should, explain why you should be at the higher end of that range? Make sure you come in with that information. Identify and negotiate with a common goal. Just coming in and saying, I'm great, this is why you should pay me more, isn't necessarily a terribly great tactic. Well, if you can say, I know that this particular program wants to do X, Y, and Z, and I come in with skills A, B, and C. And as a result, I have this leg up and I can help you to reach these particular goals. And therefore, that's why I would like to get paid more. As soon as you make it about the mission of the group or the institution or the department or whatever, you're going to get a little bit more traction with that. Know your bottom line and have a plan B. What is the lowest you're willing to be paid? You should have a number in mind. And if that is not reached, know what your plan B is, know what your cutoffs are, have a game plan for your job search. Some company policies may not be fluid. This is something to keep in mind. You may want a particular thing, but it may not be possible to get that particular thing. So it may be helpful to ask during an interview process, or even check out through the job postings. Some HR policies are posted publicly, and you may be able to check out and say, oh, is this fluid? Oh, that's not fluid. Maybe some things are fluid that you can maybe decide with your potential employer. Maybe they're able to negotiate something on your behalf. But it's helpful to know which things are movable and which things are not movable. And this is maybe a hot take too, but share your salary. And I don't necessarily mean out in the world on, shouting from the rooftops. But if you are within a particular position, or if you are, whether it's geographically local or not, if you are around people who are sort of your peers in terms of what your positions are, it's not a bad idea to share your salary. And the reason, let me explain why that is. There's been a lot of really, really important reports that have come out that equity concerns come out when people share their salary. And in fact, this actually has happened to me personally, where I had a particular coworker that was getting paid a lot more than me, despite having substantially less experience than myself. And it came out into sort of a bigger conversation that really needed to be addressed. And so there's these issues of equity that you will never know about if you don't have these conversations. And so if you are a woman or a minority, or if you're an ally, it is important to give a sense of those things so that we can root out those inequities and create a much more diverse space where everybody really is getting their fair pay. So how good is a good fit? If you're looking at a job posting, you say, okay, all right, I'm going to go try for this, but I have to have it wants all of these things and I don't have all of those things, so therefore it's not a good job for me. That is not true. And I used to look for jobs that way all the time. And as a result, you don't really grow your skill set. You end up getting stuck in the exact same positions over and over again. So what you want to look for is 75% of qualifications. And so if you are this piece trying to fit into this particular opening, that will never work. You don't want to make sure that you don't want to be completely out of left field. However, maybe you look a little bit like this piece. Right? So you're almost there. It's kind of sort of like, if you squint a little, it kind of looks similar. And there's a couple little things, caveats here. Check your non-negotiables. If they say essential duties include, and you don't have those, that might be a red flag that might not be for you. But maybe you kind of have them, or maybe you're not even close. If you're not even close, probably don't do that. But maybe you kind of have them. Maybe you did this once for a fraternity like 10 years ago or whatever. And it was an informal position. You never put it on your CV. You never thought it was important, but it turns out that maybe that particular skill could be helpful. So maybe that particular piece for you looks kind of like this, but unlike cardboard, humans, in fact, can grow in their skill sets. So what you can do is use the cover letter to basically show them that if you are allowed to be in this position, here is what you bring to the table, and I have X, Y, and Z. And here's a thing that I didn't put on my CV because it's not an official role. However, I know that I could grow into this really important qualification and be a better fit, if I'm allowed the chance, right? So really, don't sell yourself short. You want to give yourself a position that allows you to grow into it. Personal connections is a really important one. Try to engage with people on something other than just their work. And again, this is a tip I wish I would have known forever and ever ago. Connect with people on their common place of origin. Maybe you walk into their office and they have pictures of their kids and you're like, oh, I have a niece that really likes soccer. Or, oh, I have a kid that's that same age or whatever. Or maybe you ask about their hobbies. A great opener for that is, what are you doing this weekend, right? It's a completely innocent question, but as a result, you find out what they're interested in. And it turns out a lot of times you might have something in common and it gives you a personal connection. Don't be afraid to compliment people. People like to hear happy things and positive things about themselves, but be thoughtful about what you're complimenting. Compliment their confidence in presenting something, or, hey, that presentation style was really dynamic and really spoke to me. Or your graphics are exceptional. I really would love to know how you did blah. That takeaway message really, spun around in my head and made me think about things. Really appreciate that. Hey, your enthusiasm was awesome. I really couldn't take my eyes away because you're so exciting. So that's a really great way to connect with people that you don't know. And here's another thing, send thank you messages or follow-ups after meetings. So if you do have a meeting, like a once in a while kind of meeting with people, hey, thank you for your time. Quick email is fine. If you have an interview that's an on-site, or if you are, someone's making a special effort to meet with you, I strongly advocate the paper thank you card. And I know that sounds crazy. You're like, Marta, you just turned 40 this weekend and now you're old and therefore you're out of touch. And that may be the truth. However, I will say that writing a paper thank you card goes an awful long way because it takes extra effort. You have to actually get the thing. You have to write the thing. You have to slap it in an envelope. You got to put an address on it. You got to put a stamp on it. People notice that. People don't get happy mail. Everyone gets is bills and periodicals they don't care about. So if they get a nice thank you card that's like, hey, I really appreciated the time that you took. It's a really nice, pleasant experience. And people remember you in a really favorable way. Everything does not require 100% full effort. And I will say, for me personally, I am a hardcore overachiever. I struggle with perfectionism, and this is something I've had to tell myself many, 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 many times. And I wish I had known this a long, long time ago. So if you are in the same boat, hopefully this helps you. You need to work hard and you need to know your limits. So if you're like, nope, can't take that on, you need to be able to say that and know that about yourself. Prioritize those work tasks. They're not all equally important. Refrain from establishing unrealistic expectations early on. And this last one is the one that really speaks to me the most. Those last 10 to 15% of you trying to be perfect on that project may end up costing you 50% of your time, and no one will even notice half the time. So shoot for good mediocrity most of the time. Some things require that extra 10 to 15%. I'm not saying don't try. I'm saying a lot of things don't actually require that. And don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. So if you are sitting there and you're like, oh, I can't submit this because it's not perfect yet, I bet it's probably good enough. And you may be able to save yourself an awful lot of hassle and get a lot more time and efficiency that way by just saying it's probably good enough for what it is that I need to do. Work environment is everything. So work environment through either an interview or the actual work, it should make you feel happy, hopeful, maybe thoughtful, maybe thinking about a problem, or empowered. But here are red flags that you should listen to your body. If you feel afraid, targeted, dismissed, unappreciated, secretive, you feel like you have to hide from people, looked down on. If you're feeling gaslit, by that I mean if you feel like someone's lying to you and they're trying to make you think that something is true that's not really true. Stifled, you feel like you can't grow, those are all red flags. And those are things that you should really listen to your body if you feel that way. I put a little asterisk next to singled out and uncomfortable. Singled out can be bad. It can be, hey, you're bad at everything, blah, 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 blah. But it also can be, hey, you're really excellent. So of course, that depends on context. And uncomfortable, when people say I feel uncomfortable, that's generally thought of as a bad thing. And in many cases, you know, most of the context that's used, it generally is, right? It means there's something that's maybe not great that's happening. However, I will say that feeling uncomfortable because you're being challenged to do something that is outside of your comfort zone is a very good thing. So I will, you know, outright call out Eric on this. He often does this to me where he'll say, hey, I want you to do blah. And I'll be like, I don't know if I can do that. And, you know, it's you know, a lot of that comes from, you know, my own feelings about what my capabilities are. And I may feel very uncomfortable during that, but it's actually really good for you. It's good for you to feel that discomfort as you're being challenged. So, you know, I guess I'll put that little asterisk there. So being someone who has initiative and follow through, if an opportunity doesn't exist and you want to do it, find people to support you and make your own path. So this is an example of an outreach program I started at Villanova. It did not exist. I wanted to do it. I found people to support me. I got money to do it. And I put together a really robust program that ran over the span of my entire 9 years there, serving hundreds and hundreds of students with over 100 undergrads who were involved in this over the span of my time there. It's possible to do. Create the initiatives if you want to make something happen. You should not expect to be an expert in everything. So normalize not knowing. Ask questions of people who are experts. Don't pretend to know things you don't know. And focus on being an expert information seeker. So knowing, you know, hey, where can I find that information? That doesn't mean you shouldn't know things. Obviously, study and be an expert in the things you're an expert in. But if there are things that are adjacent or maybe you don't know as much about, try to get a better sense of where you can find that information. And this is another kind of ugly truth, which is many people in leadership do not have training in leadership. Again, things I wish I would have known a long, long time ago that really matter, because what that means is that that potential employer you're talking to may not have really good training in how to interview people. They may not have great training in how to manage people. Professors, for example, you might think, oh, clearly they've been trained in how to teach. False. We do not get trained how to teach. Most professors have not had any classes in education. Researchers, you might say, oh, well, they probably explained how to do research in a lab. They went through grad school. Sure, but running a research lab is very different than being a researcher. So keeping that in mind, that being a leader in that leadership role is very, very different. And administration, I don't actually know who this person is, but the idea being here that sometimes in administration, people get promoted from, say, professorial roles, and they don't necessarily get leadership training. So that is really important, and unfortunately feeds into imposter syndrome, which I'm going to go ahead and plug Allison, who's coming up at 4 o'clock today during her talk. Imposter syndrome is sort of one of those things that just keeps coming up, and many of us have it. And so part of the reason that the schedule is the way it is today is because I really want us to spend a little bit of time, hopefully, to figure out how we can, you know, work through that particular thing. Idea of, oh, well, it was just an accident that I accomplished all these things. It was just circumstances. But in reality, we've all, you know, worked really hard to get where we are. And it's important to give yourself credit and know your worth. So key takeaways, there's much more to academia than meets the eye, right? There's a lot of different factors to consider. And knowing your worth and being sure to listen to your internal cues. Now, keeping your options open, I promise this section is very short. So there are opportunities to do a little bit of work that is unpaid that actually can lead to future paid opportunities. So you know how I mentioned that sometimes you only meet 75% of the qualifications? Well, let's pretend you meet 100 of them, but you still want opportunities to grow. That means that you can engage in unpaid tasks. For example, I organized that outreach program, and that made it possible for me to get a position involving outreach and community engagement, despite the fact that I got paid $0 to run that outreach program. I was the head of a sustainability and education committee, and what that does is it demonstrates the ability to communicate interdisciplinarily, as well as, you know, some knowledge of sustainability. Publishing, my previous role did not place any clout at all on publishing. I was there as a teaching professor, and I still made a point to try to publish whenever I could, whether it was internally or externally, because I wanted to be taken seriously as a green chemistry scholar or a chemistry educator. And that means that that future paid opportunity can appreciate that and take you seriously. Or taking on a leadership role within a committee. A lot of times you get this, not it, I don't want to do it. But if you do that and you take on that role that nobody else wants, then you have a chance to prove your leadership skills, which can lead to future paid opportunities. So create those opportunities for yourself if you can. Keep excellent notes so that you can go back to them in the future and be able to remember some of the things that you've learned over time. Documentation, by that I mean, let's say there's a particularly complicated or maybe a controversial situation, document. Absolutely keep that information, because it will be very, very helpful to you as you navigate another similarly complex situation. Keep excellent files. I cannot tell you how many times I have dug back into files from like 10 years ago and built off of work I've previously done rather than having to reinvent the wheel. And relationships. I put LinkedIn on there. I mean, even beyond that, go out for coffee with people, maintain those relationships outside of even just the professional relationships, because those are the things that are going to help you feel like you fit into particular roles, and it'll be an opportunity to get more knowledge about what's out there in that academic job market. Finally, gratitude and attitude are not challenges, they are choices. Be grateful for what you are and for where you are and for what you're doing. It is very, very important that you come into these experiences, and even if it's not exactly what you want it to be grateful for it. Say thank you for little things. And if it's a bigger thing, right, send a thank you card or whatever. But it's really, really important to maintain that particular perspective. And so with that, key takeaways from this position or from this aspect: prepare your way for future options, show some initiative, take those chances, communicate gratitude frequently to build some positivity around you. Oops, I went the wrong way. And with that, I want to thank you for your attention and your kindness in listening. And thank you to the NSF, obviously, for their funding, members of the CSSM, and everyone whose advice was represented here, everyone who really helped me along my way here. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Let's all thank Marta for her excellent talk. And we've got some time for questions now. People can either unmute or throw them in the chat, or whatever people want to do.
I guess I'll start off with a comment, Max. I really enjoyed all the advice that you gave in that presentation, Dr. Guron, because I feel like oftentimes, like, inside of the academic environment, people like don't give us life advice, but that life advice was so good. It really was. And I think something that really resonated with me was the thank you letter thing. Because I think it's true that all the mail you get like now is just all spam mail, and it really makes your day when somebody takes the effort to send something to you. So I think I'm gonna start like making it a point to send more thank you letters to people.
They do make an impact. I've actually had people tell me and send me emails later, be like, I can't believe you took the time to do that. It makes you memorable. It's a big deal. Yeah.
Maddie, did you have a question? Cool.
Oh, I did see a question come through in the chat, actually. So how do you find conferences to go to, and what sorts of things are out there? So conferences to go to is a complicated question. A lot of times you would find that from, whatever it is that you're interested in. If you are working with a potential, with a faculty member, they're generally really good at knowing what the niche conferences are and what the more generalized conferences are, and they might be able to help you. That's really my best advice, because that's something that they're very well versed in. So that would be definitely a place to go. You can also, you can search things out. If there's something that you really want to know about, let's say I actually did this at some point. I wanted to get more professional development in teaching. And so I just started Googling, science teaching conferences, and you find stuff, that way. The hard part, I will say, is finding resources to be able to get to conferences, because conferences are quite expensive. So sometimes it means you do have to write proposals to do that. Sometimes you have to twist some arms, and sometimes there's just not as much support as you'd like to be able to do those things. But they are really, 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 really critically important in order to create those networks. And in terms of what sorts of conferences are out there, pretty much anything you could ever possibly imagine. If there is any kind of specialized topic, people are probably meeting to talk about it.
Anyone else?
Oh, I guess I have a question for you. If you were a PhD student who's like going into around like the last year of your program, like what is a piece of advice that like you would have wished you'd known at the time?
That I would say that it's probably best not to, well, I guess a couple things. One thing is that the people that you are in a program with are not your competition. They are your friends, they are your support network, they are going to be the people who are your network later on. And at the same time, you're going to have very diverse work paths, career paths, no matter what it is that you do, they're all going to be a little bit different. I will say that that a career path where you go right out of college and you get to have the same job and keep it until the day you retire is not a thing that happens to most people anymore. I will say, some people maybe get their tenure track position right out of their PhD program or out of a postdoc program, and great. If you can get that, fantastic. I will say that is by far the minority, and most people are they're gonna bounce around quite a bit before they settle down in wherever it is that they need to be. And I will say that particular, what am I trying to say? The space around that is changing a little bit. There is, more, some people are going more toward like lecturers and instructors because it's easier. It's less of an investment for the university. On the other hand, some people are going more toward more tenured positions because they're like, oh, well, then we don't have to keep hiring. And so it sort of depends, but that particular scene is very dynamic, especially in the past few years. So yeah, it is, I wish that I had known that going in, because I think that I found myself having expectations that were highly unrealistic as far as what it would look like once I moved into the job market.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else? Last minute. Oh, Maddie's got a question. Oh, multiple questions in the chat. Marta, do you want to just Maddie asked.
Don't see them.
Okay.
I was gonna say she can't see them. I send them to Max.
What is your? Oh, sorry about that. Sorry. Okay. So, question. What is your best advice working with URM? How do you get involved but not displace other folks? Extremely salient question.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So the position that I had at that particular nonprofit was really kind of eye-opening to me, because despite the fact that, and even now when I think back on it, every minority group has slightly different challenges, I guess it was what I would say. And so I found that, the particular group that was at this nonprofit, they were largely Black and Latinx communities. And there was this huge culture that I got to be part of. And it was really, really exciting. And I really went into it very much just listening. I wasn't really trying to fix or change or implement anything. I really wanted to understand what the culture was, and I wanted to amplify that voice. And that is like the biggest thing that I would say, is that these, groups exist, and basically finding a way to get invited to some kind of an event there, and just listening, not trying to fix, not trying to adjust, but literally just listening, is has been really, really helpful. And based off of that listening, then when you go back to a different space where you might be able to, you know, impart some changes, you now feel maybe a little bit more able to speak to the challenges that different groups are facing.
Fantastic. And another question from the chat. Yes, what was your deciding factors of choosing academia instead of industry?
A good question. I guess a few things. Industry is driven by profit, right? And so if something is not profitable, you don't get to pursue it in general. Like that might not always be the case, right? There is some R&D, right? And that sort of thing. But I've heard just countless stories of people who said, oh, I was working on this thing for 4 years and I thought it was going really well, but it didn't meet arbitrary, you know,